If you're a fan of the Western Cowboy movies, there's a high chance you've seen this pretty face before. This is Charles Bronson, the global action superstar of the 60s and 70s. However, if you told him when he was a kid that he'd grow up to be the biggest film star in the world, he probably would not believe you. In fact, the little kid did not even know what a movie was. Filled with tragedy, drama, romance, betrayals, and miracles, Charles Bronson's life was nothing short of a movie plot itself. Family struggles. In the late 19th century, the state of Pennsylvania in America became home to hundreds of thousands of Lithuanian immigrants. They were on the run from political and economic instability in the Russian Empire, and were mostly poorly educated rural people who did not have a penny to their name. They were endearingly called grynorii, or greenhorns, meaning people who are inexperienced and unfamiliar with their surroundings, in this case a new country and culture altogether. One of these grinorii was the young Vladislavas Valteris Paulius Bučinskis, and boy did he have a difficult name. So he decided to call himself Walter Bučinski and settled in the coal mining town of Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. He married Mary Valinsky, and they had 15 children together, which was quite a problem considering that they were extremely poor, so much so that the family struggled to even put food on the table most days. This is where the star of our story comes in. Charles Bronson, born Charles Dennis Bučinski in November 1921, was the 11th of the 15 siblings. Growing up, it was not easy. Not everyone got food or clothes, and not everyone went to school. They had to take hand-me-downs to a whole new level. Charles wore his elder sister's dress to school, and as soon as he got back home, he had to take off his socks so his brother could wear them to work in the coal mines. To make matters worse, being an immigrant family, they only spoke Lithuanian or Russian at home, and Charles barely spoke any English until his teenage years. As you can imagine, throughout his childhood, Charles never really got to know his father well. Walter took on more shifts than he could physically manage to somehow try and feed the family, which meant he was rarely at home. Unfortunately, he passed away when Charles was only 10 years old. Every single boy had already signed up to work in the mines, and as soon as Charles graduated, he, too, went to work in the mines. The hours were long, the work was really dangerous, and the pay was miserable. You could get only $1 if you managed to mine a whole ton of coal, which is 1,000 kilograms. To do that, each brother had to take on multiple shifts just to try and make $1 a week. Charles and one of his brothers were even assigned to remove the stumps that held up the mine shafts and move them, which caused a lot of cave-ins. The long hours and grueling work got to the brothers. Charles lost 4 of his brothers to the mines and the respiratory complications they brought along with them. Things weren't any better at home either. No matter how much the family worked, they struggled to put food on the table and get enough clothes for the cold winter. Cramped inside a small shack, Charles lost 3 of his sisters as well to malnutrition and pneumonia. The poor lad could not take it anymore, especially when he started feeling claustrophobic. He decided to quit the mines and move away to make some money for his family. New career path. When America was pulled into the chaos of the Second World War, young Charles decided to enlist in the military. He started his training with the United States Army Air Forces in a gunnery training squadron. Despite the hard work, intense training, and the fact that he would soon be shipped to the war front during one of the biggest conflicts in the world, this was the best thing that had ever happened in Charles's life. Why, you might ask? Because for the first time, he had clean clothes and enough to eat every day. After his training, Charles was assigned to a bombardment squadron operating in Guam as an aerial gunner on a Boeing B-29 Superfortress bomber. He flew and fought in 25 missions over the Japanese islands, but his military career was short-lived. On his last flight, Charles was shot in his left arm by a Japanese fighter pilot, which left him permanently scarred and resulted in him being sent back home with a Purple Heart for his service. Charles returned to picking up odd jobs wherever he could, doing everything from construction to driving. It was one of his small-time painting jobs in Atlantic City that was about to turn his life around completely. A theater acting troupe on vacation from Philadelphia was impressed by his painting work and offered him some work to paint and design their sets. While on the job, Charles found out how much money actors were making, and his first thought was, "Wait a minute, I can do that as well." First love. Charles had a new vision for his life: to be an actor. While he decided to enter the industry just thinking about the money he could make, and not really for the art, he needed skills to even land a gig. And so 26-year-old Charles Buczynski enrolled in a Philadelphia acting school. In his acting class was 18-year-old Harriet Tendler, also dreaming of being an actress. Harriet was the daughter of a successful and wealthy dairy farmer, someone who lived in a completely different world from Charles. A friendship blossomed between the two, and over time it grew into something more. However, there was a problem. When Charles took Harriet out on their very first date, blinded by love, he had forgotten one important detail. He had only 4 cents in his pocket. At this point, most women would have given up on him, but not Harriet Tendler. She stayed by his side and supported him through acting school. Despite her father's disapproval, the young couple got married 2 years later in 1949 at the City Hall Club in Atlantic City. Soon after the wedding, with only $250 to their name and a couple of one-way bus tickets, Charles and Harriet moved to California. The stage was now set for Charles. Harriet gave up on her acting dream to unconditionally support Charles by working and providing for the family, while Charles pursued acting opportunities. It was a simple arrangement. Charlie promised that once he finally made it big, he'd make sure they could work on the big screen together. But unfortunately, that day never came for Harriet. A new chapter, Hollywood. 2 more years passed, during which Charles spent time in acting classes at the Pasadena Playhouse and networking with filmmakers to catch his first break. Believe it or not, Charles landed his first gig because of his unique talent for being able to burp on command. His acting class teacher introduced him to Hollywood director Henry Hathaway, who was working on the movie You're in the Navy Now. Charles ticked all the boxes for the part. He had served in the military, he was a struggling small-time actor, and he could burp on command. This last point was apparently one of the deciding factors in securing him a brief minor role in the movie as Waskalewski, a troublemaking shipmate. While he only had a couple of lines and had gotten the role based on something silly, the movie helped him establish a good relationship with director Henry Hathaway, which led to more minor roles in Hathaway's movies the following year, including My 6 Convicts, The Marrying Kind, and Red Skies of Montana. Charles Buczynski was far from making it as an actor, but he was getting noticed. He picked up many small-time roles in movies as well as TV shows, most notably when he played a boxer who fights against Western Cowboy star Roy Rogers in the show Knockout. His first major supporting role came in 1953 when he was scouted for director André de Toth's horror film House of Wax, playing Igor, the mute sidekick of Vincent Price. Although Charles had joined the industry for the money, he had slowly fallen in love with the art itself. To prepare for his role, Charlie took special classes in American Sign Language and tried to stay in character by speaking as little as he could on set. The movie was a huge success, reaching 4th place in the box office rankings that year and making $23 million, which was a lot at the time. To put it in perspective, that would be approximately $265 million today. Many critics were impressed by his work, and so was de Toth, who went on to cast him in his movies Riding Shotgun and Crime Wave. Charles was getting plenty of work now, and was being noticed for his surprisingly good performances in small roles, like the Indian warrior in Aldrich's 1954 film Apache. It seemed like everything was going well for dear Charles, but he was suddenly getting fewer offers than he expected. The year was 1954, and the Red Scare was at its height again. The House Un-American Activities Committee was blacklisting actors who showed any kind of sympathy toward communism, and many immigrants were caught in the crossfire. As a person of Lithuanian descent with a Russian-sounding last name, Charles Buczynski could have been in a lot of trouble. His concerned agent gave him simple advice: just change your name. Unsure of what to do, Charlie panicked and picked a name from a random street sign outside the movie studio, which just so happened to be Bronson Avenue in Los Angeles. A new star was reborn as Charles Bronson. Metaphorically speaking, of course, Western cowboy films and TV shows were all the craze in the 1950s, and Bronson found himself in role after role, playing outlaws or Indian warriors in films like Vera Cruz, Gunsmoke, Drumbeat, Jubal, Run of the Arrow, Colt 45, The Sheriff of Cochise, and Have Gun Will Travel. He even starred in the popular TV show Alfred Hitchcock Presents, directed by one of the most iconic directors of all time. He was known for his passionate performances and his ability to completely immerse himself in the personality of his character, a technique known as method acting. In fact, his method acting once almost landed him in prison in Mexico. While shooting Vera Cruz in Mexico, Bronson convinced his fellow actor Ernest Borgnine to ride into town together, completely in character, dressed in costume, guns at their sides, and whatnot. As soon as they approached the town, they were stopped for questioning by the federales, who thought they were real outlaws. Thankfully, Bronson broke out of character, but they still had a lot of convincing to do before they were finally let go. Charles Bronson got his first major break in 1958. He landed his first lead role in Roger Corman's biographical film about the real-life gangster Machine Gun Kelly for $5,000. Bronson was a natural performer and was finally in the spotlight. He landed lead role after lead role in the same year, starting with another Western film, Showdown at Boot Hill, and the successful World War II drama When Hell Broke Loose. Later that year, he starred in the ABC series Man with a Camera, playing Mike Kovac, a freelance crime-fighting photographer in New York City. The series ran for 2 years until 1960, and Charles earned $2,000 per week for the entire 29-episode run. Charles Bronson was finally able to buy his first house in California, where he lived with his wife Harriet and their 2 children, Suzanne and Tony. On to bigger things. The 1960s changed everything in Charles Bronson's life. He was now starring in TV shows and movies in lead roles, and was making a lot of money while doing it. He was approached by director John Sturges to be one of the 7 in an expensive film project, The Magnificent Seven, which featured a group of gunfighters determined to protect a town's defenseless civilians. While the film was a major disappointment in America, it became a smash hit in European movie theaters. The movie brought global recognition and helped establish the careers of not only Charles Bronson, but also Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen, Robert Vaughn, James Coburn, and the antagonist Eli Wallach. Charles earned $50,000 for The Magnificent Seven, which is roughly a little over $500,000 today. In 1963, John Sturges cast Bronson again in another ensemble film, The Great Escape, along with fellow actors Steve McQueen, James Coburn, James Garner, Richard Attenborough, and David McCallum, playing World War II prisoners of war. Bronson was a Polish prisoner who had claustrophobia, which was perfect since Charlie had experienced claustrophobia from his early years in the mine shafts. The movie went on to be a massive success, critically acclaimed as one of the all-time classics in action, and topped the charts as the highest-grossing movie of the year. On the set of The Great Escape, Charles became especially good friends with Scottish actor David McCallum. One day, David brought his wife, Jill Ireland, along with him on set and introduced her to Charles. That was a big mistake. Bronson immediately fell head over heels for Jill's beauty and told David that he was going to steal his wife and marry her someday. Although it was played off as a joke at the time, the friendship turned sour, and Charles would flirt with Jill any chance he had in an attempt to woo her. It did not take long for Harriet to catch on. Complicated relationships. Charles and Harriet had been drifting apart for some time now. Harriet had her suspicions because of a sudden change in her husband's behavior, so she hired a private detective to find out what was going on. She was devastated to find out that Charlie was seeing someone else and filed for divorce in 1965. In her book of memoirs, Charlie and Me, Harriet mentions that Charlie tried to convince her and talk her out of the divorce, but she said that she could have forgiven him for cheating on her. However, seeing him fall in love with someone else was more heartbreaking, and she could not stay. Harriet was now depressed and felt like her life was falling apart. She was unable to take care of their 2 children, and without any resistance, their custody was awarded to Charles. She couldn't bear to see Charlie and Jill together on the big screen without breaking down, because it was supposed to be her up there on the screen with Charlie. She never remarried, but gradually started to regain her confidence and became a very popular late-night radio talk show host. On the other side, tensions were high between David McCallum and Jill Ireland. Jill had become enamored with Charlie's advances, and 12 months after the Bronsons' divorce, Jill divorced David and got custody of their 3 children. Soon after, 42-year-old Charles Bronson and 26-year-old Jill Ireland started seeing each other officially and tied the knot a year later in 1968 in a simple ceremony at the Santa Monica City Hall. Charlie bought a new Bel Air mansion to live with Jill and the 5 children. The couple would go on to have 2 daughters together, Zuleika and Katrina. Global star. Charles Bronson had finally made it. He was starring in smash hit after smash hit. Dirty Dozen, 1967, broke records for commercial success, with tickets selling out faster than expected. On the other hand, Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968, was a global hit, regarded as one of the best Western films and one of the greatest movies of all time. Charlie became even more popular in Europe with French films Adieu l'ami, Rider on the Rain, and Someone Behind the Door. It was no surprise when, in 1971, Charles Bronson won the special Golden Globe Henrietta Award for Most Popular Actor in the World. At this point, Charles was making $1 million for almost every movie he starred in. He even got his wife, Jill Ireland, to star in key roles in his movies alongside him. Together, the duo worked in 16 movies. Coming from a huge family himself and having his father absent for his whole life, Charles was big on family values and keeping his children close. Wherever Charles and Jill went for movie shoots, they brought all the children along and always traveled together. Charles had everything he ever wanted: a loving family, enough money never to have to worry about it, and global fame. But in 1984, he had some troubling news. Final years. In May 1984, during one of her routine examinations, doctors suggested that Jill get a few tests done. After almost 48 hours of tests and scans, Jill returned to her hospital room only to find a distressed Charlie. When she asked him what had happened and what the doctor had said, Charlie only replied with one word: malignant. Jill had breast cancer. Charlie took a break from his acting career to stay home and take care of his wife. Jill had to go through radiation treatment and chemotherapy, but her chances were still pretty slim. She fought cancer for 6 years and started writing a book about her life. This is when 29-year-old Kim Weeks came into their lives to assist Jill with her book and anything else she needed, including looking after the finances and the children. She was indispensable to the Bronson family. Unfortunately, in May 1990, 54-year-old Jill Ireland passed away at their home in Malibu. Charles was devastated. He kept her room as it was and vowed never to marry again. Charles starred in a few movies in the 1990s, but his spirit was not the same after losing his wife. In 1998, he decided to retire altogether after having to undergo hip replacement surgery. Advancing age was taking a toll on Charlie's health, and his assistant Kim Weeks had to take care of him full-time. Kim put down the ultimatum that Charles would have to marry her if he wanted her to continue looking after his affairs. He promptly put a ring on her finger in 1998. It was the best decision he made. A year later, Charles started showing signs of Alzheimer's. His health was deteriorating, and he no longer even remembered that he used to be the world's biggest action hero. Charles Bronson passed away at the age of 81 in 2003 in Los Angeles, leaving behind his estate and legacy to Kim Weeks and his children. Throughout his life, Charles Bronson starred in over 90 different movies, many of which are considered to be some of the greatest of all time. It is more than inspiring to see how a poor young boy from a tiny coal mining settlement who never had the money to watch a movie would go on to be the world's favorite action movie star.